So hello, everyone. This is Peter Lortz, Vice President of Instruction. Welcome to a summer quarter, very unique all-faculty meeting here at North. We're going to be Zooming for this, and there will be participants coming in and out, I'm sure, but this meeting's been kind of a long time coming, so I'm glad that we're finally able to get together. I want to start with a land acknowledgement. And DeAndre has been putting a little twist on this as we're now in the Zoom space. So I may not do as good a job as he did, but on behalf of North Seattle College, we acknowledge that we occupy the traditional ancestral lands of the Coast Salish people, specifically the Duwamish tribe, a people that are still here, continuing to honor and bring light to their ancient heritage. Without them, we would not have access to this gathering, dialogue, learning space, and Zoom space. And we ask that we take this opportunity to thank the original caretakers of this land who are still here. And on this note, actually, I'd like to share some good news that through a partnership with Clear Sky Initiative, we've created a pipeline for Native American students. And we just got news today that of the 8 students who have graduated through the Clear Sky Initiative, 5 of them are headed to North. So we're really excited about that. I want to also start with another acknowledgement, a thank you, and a hope. The acknowledgement is a recognition of the unprecedented times that we're living in, at least in my lifetime, and the reckoning that our country is finally facing, brought about by the lack of preparation for the coronavirus, the resurfacing of systemic racism, and the general tenor and tone of our politics and our basic human behavior. With all of this, and despite our deep challenges, I do remain optimistic that not only we as a college, but also as a country are going to come out better for this. So I remain hopeful. I also want to recognize that each of you have been personally affected in some way by these conditions. And I want to pause briefly and just acknowledge that and hope that you are making it through, that you are staying safe and sane and healthy. I want to thank you for your resilience, for your adaptability, for your creativity, for your grit. In many ways, the current circumstances that we're facing have brought out the best of us, and I've seen witness to that and heard from the students. And finally, I hope that each of you are finding or being given opportunities to rest, to escape, to recharge, and to take care of yourself and others. There's 2 focuses of this meeting, and I want to roughly divide the time equally in half. So fall quarter in the time of COVID-19, and then budget situation and planning. The fall quarter will be, well, in both cases, I'm going to talk briefly and lay some context and then kind of give you an update of where we are. But I want to turn over for both of these really time for you to ask questions, share your thoughts, and pose challenges for us. So fall quarter in the time of COVID, really this discussion's been going on since February, but most recently, there have been a couple of key events that have allowed us to really focus in on what the fall quarter, is going to look like. About 3 weeks ago, the state higher ed fall quarter reopening plan was released. And this was a collaboration between 2-year colleges, 4-year colleges, and the governor's office in a task force led by Christine Gregoire with a consultant as well. From that reopening plan, many questions were generated, and about a week later, an accompanying FAQ was released to address those questions. So with that information, the district COVID teams and the college COVID teams have been looking at each college's capacity and capabilities for a fall quarter. And we've been looking not only at space, but we've also been looking at the human capabilities and capacity that we have to maintain safe and clean spaces. With that work, we identified approximately 7 classrooms, that would hold 20 or fewer teacher and students. And so with that number, we started working with programs to see who was interested in at least some meeting face-to-face and what it would take to do so. Based on all of those preliminary conversations, it became very clear not only to North, but also to Central and South as well, although South has other challenges, that we are going to remain largely remote for the fall quarter. Now, there are a few exceptions. Professional technical labs that require face-to-face for credentials will continue to have on-campus instruction for the lab components. So things like medical assisting, watch technology, some electronics classes have been meeting through labs. And for each of those programs, a plan was developed, a safety plan was developed. That plan was approved at the district level, and the faculty and students have been operating under the safety protocols. There are check-ins and check-outs every day. You get a wristband when you check in to show that you have correctly filled out the questionnaire and that you are not carrying COVID. And then you have to check out when you leave the campus. We are maintaining social distancing. People are walking around in masks. When social distancing can't be maintained, there are other protocols that are in place to try to keep people safe. I do want to let people know that we have had a couple of scares of potential COVID exposures. Neither of those was significant, although there have been moments where we had to temporarily stop a certain program so that we could make sure that the cleaning was there and that it was all safe. If you are interested in on-campus instruction, please talk with your dean. Now, we're not going to be doing any regular instruction. We're not going to be doing a 9 o'clock, 5-day-a-week class. But we do have the capabilities for some in-person meetings if faculty are interested. Again, it won't be anything regularly scheduled, but there had been conversations about doing an orientation for your students. If you wanted to show them what the online class was like, if you wanted to talk to them about the structure of the class, introduce yourself, etc. I will say that the great majority of those discussions, in fact, I'm not aware of any discussion that hasn't gone the way of the faculty saying that they are not interested in being on campus except for those Prof Tech labs. So we will maintain a few Prof Tech labs for sure. There's the opportunity for a few in-person meetings if you're interested. Talk with your dean if you're interested, but know that you will have to develop you will have to read through the safety guidelines and the protocols, and then there are obligations that you must meet. You have to complete a plan yourself on how you'll meet the obligations and stick to the protocols. And then there's a set of responsibilities defined in the obligations as well. Because unfortunately, we don't have the custodial staff necessary to clean up after every classroom use. So there are obligations and responsibilities that are outlined in a document if you're interested, and talk with your dean if you are interested in looking into that. At the district level, there will be an official announcement about the fall quarter that will come out on August 5th. Sonia Renner in our communications department is working with the communications departments at Central, South, and at the district so that there will be consistent messaging for both employees and for students. And that messaging will include not only the conditions under which North will be operating, but also we are describing things like what are the various learning modes that students may see. How can they access student services? How can they access learning support services and things like that? So there will be an official announcement starting next week, but unofficially, you've probably been talking with or have heard in your programs and in your divisions. And again, what we've heard from you all thus far, and not only faculty, but also students, is that there are the great majority, and again, I'm not aware of anything to the contrary, but I'll say the great majority are not interested in being on campus, which I will say on a personal level, it makes sense to me. I mean, we all, lessons learned from the unfortunate attempt to get started earlier in the state and in the nation. We've learned some hard lessons, and I feel like we really need to dig in at this point. Before I get into the next slide, I do want to mention, and this may come up, that the deans and I are raising questions about the winter quarter already. So we have asked the district COVID team, as well as I'm having conversations with the district VPIs, the 3 VPIs and Kurt Buttleman, about the winter quarter. And while some may think that that's a long ways off, we recognize that schedule building for the winter quarter is happening. Students are asking questions. I know some of you are asking questions. And we have the wrinkle of transferring to CTC Link for the winter quarter. So we have to build a schedule in both our legacy system and in our new CTC Link system. So not only are we going to be doing this under COVID conditions, we're going to be doing it in a brand new system. And the staff who input the schedule and make the revisions are still not entirely sure what the workload is like in CTC Link. So for all of those reasons, we are really pushing hard to start the discussions about the winter quarter, recognizing that we don't have all of the information, but recognizing that time is of the essence. So I want to pause, and again, my intention here is to really give a lot of time for questions and discussion. So that's the basic information that I wanted to provide up front about the fall quarter. The deans and Coral will be keeping an eye on the chat. And in addition, you can unmute yourself if you have any questions. So for now, I'm going to stop the share so we can see more of the faces, and feel free to fire out questions, or if someone will let me know if there have been any questions in the chat.
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yep. Hi, Nicole.
Hi. Hey, I know that Central has a VR project in the works, and I was wondering if that could be accelerated, because that would really come in helpful for how I would like to teach.
I have heard of the VR project. I believe I know that the IT department at Central is working, the instructional department is working on it. That's about the extent of what I know, but I can certainly ask, and Aaron or William, if you're here, we can ask what is the intent of that, and then if it can be accelerated and used. I think it's a great idea, and another example of how the times that we're in are accelerating adaptations, which will last much beyond the time of COVID. So I'll put down a note to ask about it. Other questions?
Yeah, Pete, I have a question.
Yeah.
And so this actually goes all the way back to spring as well.
Okay.
I'd like to talk about reciprocity of flexibility.
Okay.
It came as a kind of a surprise to me in the spring when we got the direction to post scheduled office hours the way we did when we were in person, even though that didn't really fit the new modality that a bunch of us had shifted into. And now looking at fall and some of the discussions around the virtual modality that has some in-person meetings, given that equity concerns just mean we can't really make our in-person Zoom meetings required for the class, means that those meetings then have to be recorded and the content offered in different ways. And I think that anyone who is offering those virtual meetings in addition to their class should get more than a one-to-one consideration about the number of posted office hours that they are also doing, because it is 1 hour of Zoom time is not the same as 1 hour of office hours at all. It's more like 2.5 hours once I get the content up on Canvas in another form, record the session and offer it up and do all the preparation for it. But when I was asked to then post office hours in spring, going into the fall, I'm a little bit worried that I'm going to be asked to follow old rules while also trying to fit a new modality. And I'd like there to be a little bit more reciprocity between our two sides in that case. Okay,
and I'm seeing Tracy, and then there may be some other AFT officers here, so I'd welcome them chiming in as well. From my perspective, thinking back to the scramble that was the spring, The two, management and AFT, worked to create a memorandum of understanding about faculty work for the spring. And we did our best to cover all aspects of the contract that we knew were going to be affected or impacted by the shift, the drastic shift. We recognized after the fact that we did not address office hours. And so I would welcome a conversation with the AFT about office hours. I think your points are very well taken. I know that the synchronous meeting times are being used in a variety of different ways. And I also know that the interactions that occur between faculty and students in the online environment happen in different ways as well. I remember teaching online myself and feeling like, frankly, that I was on the students expected that I was on 24/7 office hours because emails and other communications were flying all the time. So I would welcome the conversation without an MOU or an understanding of that. I know that deans are feeling beholden to the contract language, and that's not just in the at North, but across the district. So again, if AFT wants to chime in, we have some mechanisms that we can use to have that conversation. And Jim, I'm certainly open to being creative with that contractual obligation for office hours. I don't know, Tracy, if you want to chime in or others. And Alyssa, I'm sorry, I see your hand. Go ahead.
I was just going to chime in on that too, just as a dean who's fielding comments, let's say, from students. The concern from students, I guess I would urge all faculty to just be clear in your syllabus, like Pete was saying about the expectations for communication. Because I agree it's useless for you to be sitting in an empty Zoom room 5 hours a week if no one's showing up. On the other hand, there needs to be some sort of way that students can interact with you, because I've been hearing a large number of student complaints for students who just have no way to interact with their faculty. So I hear you, Jim, and I agree. I hope that faculty, either with an MOU or conversations between faculty and deans, trying to find a way that's meaningful for students and for faculty to engage with each other in the new environment. And I think we can be flexible with what that looks like as long as it's working for faculty and students.
And Pete and Jim, the only thing I would add is that, Jim, if you would send a note to Annette Stouffer and just let her know that this is an issue, I will bring it up with her as well. But clearly, there's some balls that have been dropped since the end of spring quarters, so we need to pick them up again and get them going. So thanks for bringing that up.
And we do have a negotiation session tomorrow in the afternoon, and then on the 7th, all day. And I bring that up just to say that we've been using some of the negotiation time with all of the VPIs in the room and AFT leadership district-wide in the room to talk through some of these, not necessarily new contract issues, but just existing contract issues in the time of COVID. So we have a couple of opportunities where we'll be in the same Zoom together. I keep saying room, in the same Zoom together to talk through some of these. So it's a timely ask, and we have the structure set up where we can do some of the communication on it too. Others? Jim, or I'm sorry, Joe, you're on Zoom. I mean Zoom, you're on mute. Still muted, Joe. There you go.
All right. So a couple of questions. Do we have a faculty backup plan? If a faculty member comes down with the virus, is there a plan about who would then substitute for them? And then what information would need to be conveyed from one faculty member to the other? And then the second question is, there's been talk of a 10-year buyout, and what's the timeline on that? And then if there are faculty members who take that buyout and thus will not teach fall quarter, is there a process about, what would happen to those classes or who would be reassigned those?
So I'll take the second question first, and then with the first question, I actually like to have the deans chime in as well. But and Tracy, for the second question, I know you've been working on this, so I'll share what little I know. You probably even know more than I do, and then would welcome your comments as well. There have been kind of a combination early retirement buyout conversations happening with all 4 groups, with the classified, with the professional staff, with the faculty, and then with the non-represented exempt. My understanding is that there's some basic criteria that's consistent across all 3, and then there's some uniqueness to, or I'm sorry, across all 4, and then there's some uniqueness to each of the 4. The last I heard, we were very close to agreement on the faculty MOU, but here is where I'm going to turn it over to Tracy and see if you have any more information.
Yeah, that's a great question. And we just concluded the negotiations. You should be seeing a district message probably either later today or tomorrow, just outlining what the buyout is going to be. I don't want to get into the details because there's always last minute stuff, right? But suffice to say that if you're old enough to remember the other buyout that happened, I think, was it 2008, Pete, or something like that? A while back.
That timing would be right, because that was the start of the last big recession.
Right. So it's not a lot different than that one.
And then we've also, my understanding is we've also tried to work on timing such that decisions would be made and acceptances would happen in order to give enough time to schedule changes to be made, to find new faculty to teach the classes that are no longer going to be taught by folks who took the early retirement tenure buyout. And Tracy, one other piece of it, and don't say what you can't say, but my understanding is that it can be either an early retirement or a tenure buyout. Is that correct?
It is strictly, I believe, a separation. So basically,
okay, so it is a separation. Okay.
So the retirement is a different letter that you need to submit. So yeah, we made that very clear, just because there's ramifications for VIBA, there's ramifications for when you can start teaching again, you know, that kind of stuff. So
yeah, and I know that there were ramifications for TIA CREF as well.
Right. So that's why we wanted to be real careful to keep them separate. One thing I can say to address that earlier point is that this is non-controversial. The last date you can submit your acceptance of this offer is September 18th. So I don't know when our quarter starts, but that's pretty close.
29th, I believe.
Okay. So it still gives deans about a week or so to basically fill in a hole. And
hopefully there would be some conversations happening before the 18th as well.
Right.
To your first question, Joe, about the backup plan, my reflexive response to that is that there should always be preparedness for a faculty member coming down sick or having to drop out of a class for whatever reason. And it's not always smooth, but I remember as a dean having several instances in the midst of a quarter or right before the start of a quarter where an abrupt change needed to be made. Without naming names, one of the funnier ones was when I got a call on a Saturday night about a faculty member who was vacationing in Mexico before the spring quarter and had blown out his back ziplining. And so I had to do a quick change for all of the classes that person was teaching. But I'd like to turn it over to the deans to get their thoughts on the backup plan if a faculty member does come down with COVID. No takers, nice.
I have no backup plan.
I know. I was staying muted as I was laughing. I mean, it really, this is a lot of what we do as deans, right? And as we work and faculty, we work together because all sorts of things happen. So I'm open for suggestions, but otherwise would be the same as someone throwing out their back because it's lining, or someone forgetting that the quarter started on a certain date and is still out of the country, or the things we've probably all dealt with before.
Yes, and same. I mean, I feel like in BTS, partly because of IEP, I spent a lot of time kind of making last minute crazy phone calls to try to figure out things. So that's probably how I would approach it in the situation. There are some. Unfortunately, because of low enrollments in BTS, there are some wonderful teachers who weren't able to get classes this fall. So they might be interested in a sub and something like that. So.
I also think there's a chance for us to work with program coordinators and kind of come up with a backup plan. I'm looking at Ugo right now. Ugo and Heidi, for example, teach a lot of the same classes. We've got a core group of A&P instructors that might be able to work with each other just to, be aware of or already know how each other teaches and might find some ways that they could work together in case one needed to step in for another. But thank you for bringing that up so we can start planning ahead.
This is William with Workforce Instruction. Just adding that the timing of that request for information. We just received our workforce instruction distribution list of all of the faculty and part-time that's working up within our division. And we rely heavily on that to kind of use those individuals we know are actively seeking and are interested to plug in. So that has came out this morning thanks to Chris McCurdy, and I know Aaron and I, that's kind of our first option aside from looking towards your expertise in the field or any individuals you may also know who would be interested in teaching the particular type of course.
Other questions about fall, questions and or thoughts about fall and or questions or thoughts about winter? We could open it up to the talking about winter as well. I know it's scary to think about, but.
Pete, there was a question in the chat a while ago about winter and if we have the ability to make that decision ourselves or if we are beholden to the district.
My understanding, and I'm not in the district conversations, but my understanding is that the hope is that we are making decisions that are somewhat consistent across the district. So with the fall as an example, with South Seattle College's transportation issues, they actually made their decisions about the fall back in May because they knew that the bridge was going to be out and that they had very limited bus lines. And so North and Central then were the two talking about the fall through June. And in that process, the presidents and the chancellor, actually the chancellor's executive cabinet, basically took up the conversation and decided in general on guidelines and guidance for the fall quarter in line with the higher ed reopening plan. But then it was up to each college to make the final decision what their college was going to look like. So for instance, Central, my understanding is that Central is going to have open computer labs. North is not. My understanding is that Central Student Services are going to have, I can't remember how many hours, but a certain number of hours where frontline staff will be on campus for scheduled or drop-in student appointments. North is not going to do that. So there is, even within this district consistency, there is flexibility for each college to adapt due to their own circumstances. The staff, the people that staff North's library are different than the people who staff Central's library. One may be more of a vulnerable population than another. And so each college was given the flexibility to respond or to make decisions based on our own circumstances within this larger framework. Whoever asked the question in the chat, so actually, wait, let me put a bow on that by saying that my sense is that that's what will happen for the winter as well. And please know that several of us are pushing hard to get those conversations started now for the winter. Other questions? Don't make it too easy on me. Yeah, Laura, go.
I was just curious, I see in the chat, somebody asked about whether we could be in our office on campus to do our Zoom sessions. And I'm sort of also curious in general, if there's guidance on how frequently it would be acceptable for us to work in our offices.
Provided that you're following the protocols, that you've taken the training, that you're following the protocols, yes, you can have access to your office. And at this point, there is not a restriction on how frequently you can be in your office. Now, with that said, part of the reason that we're able to do that is because we're not having a lot of people taking us up on that. So if we were to start seeing a swell of people, or if the supervisors were to see people walking around not socially distancing, not wearing masks when they should be, et cetera, we would probably have to tighten those restrictions. But at this point, I'd say if you're interested, yes, you can use your office. Let your dean know and myself, and then take the training. There's an online check-in that you need to do. When you come on campus, check in at the table and you'll get a wristband. And then expect that your office will not be cleaned after you're done. So you'll have to do the wipe down yourself.
If I could also add to that as well, as somebody who's been on campus now working for a couple months, if you're in there regularly, facilities isn't going to empty your trash for you. If you need to use the restroom, they're all locked up. You got to find, if you're in the second floor of IB, you can use that one, but know that they aren't replenishing supplies in the bathrooms very regularly either. So just be mindful that it's a ghost town. You're there by yourself. So just keep that all in mind as well.
Yeah, it's a lot like being here on a Sunday if you're prepping for Monday classes. Other questions, comments, thoughts about the fall and or winter? Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
So I am in the unfortunate position of earned a sabbatical this year, and I'm wondering when the decisions will be made about those and whether they'll be rescinded or put on hold. Or
I thought I remembered reading that all sabbaticals were going to be honored. I will follow up on that for sure. I know that you have one and Heather Price has one. Are there others that anyone's aware of that have sabbatical this year?
Elizabeth Goulet.
Say that again.
Elizabeth Goulet.
Okay, thank you. I think we just had the 3. I'll reach out to the district team and then make sure that we're honoring those 3. But I thought I remembered reading that we were. Other questions? I'll move my screen, see if I see any hands or anything.
Hi, I have a question. This is Marla Lockhart.
Hey, Marla.
Hey, how you all doing?
How's it living with a retiree?
It's pretty wonderful.
There you go.
It's pretty wonderful. I do have, speaking of retirement, I have a question surrounding that only because we are getting so many different opinions and mixed messages regarding retirement. And so I know with some people coming up to a potential buyout, and also just people with possible normal retirements, there's the question of, if you have a full retirement, do you have to be gone for 2 quarters? And I'm getting conflicting information from a lot of different sources, and I'm even trying to go back to the source, all the way back to, well, the IRS says you do, and I'm having a hard time seeing where that is at this moment. So can you shed some light on what the official requirement is for a normal retirement?
Yeah, so I'll do my best. And then again, Tracy, if there's anything you can add. And then I would also say, okay, Tracy's shaking me off. And then I would also say that Josh Ernst, E-R-N-S-T, is our still relatively new HR director. And he knows even more than I do. But what I have learned recently, I think I know, is that if you want to start drawing on retirement, then you do have to take a break from teaching. You can't just immediately go into part-time teaching, which is why I believe the decision was made to make this buyout offer a separation offer, not a retirement offer. So if you separate from the college and you are not going to draw on your retirement, I believe that you can start teaching again, or you can make yourself available to teach again right away. But if you are looking to officially retire and start pulling, at least from TIA CREF, there has to be some break. That's what I think I know.
Okay, all right. And I think I'm also trying to dig into the TIA CREF requirement to find out where their requirement comes from. And I think they're saying that it might be tax code, and I'm trying to dig into the tax code, and that might have been 2016 tax code, but I'm not sure it's current. So I'm trying to find that out simply because there are so many different answers I'm getting.
Yeah, and I do know that there are key differences between retirement, separation, and buyout, which is why we're trying to be careful on the MOU for the faculty.
Okay, all right. Thank you for thinking about that.
Yep. Other questions? About 5 more minutes, and then I do want to shift over to the budget discussion.
Pete, this is Trish. How are you? I had a question regarding the winter schedule, and I know that y'all are still working on it. John and Alyssa, thank you for saying that the schedule has to go not just into HP, but into CTC Link. So I'm wondering if there's going to be a deadline as to when it has to be in CTC Link. If, you know, if something can be in HP and then it absolutely has to go into CTC Link, which is apparently a little less friendly for changes. So that way, if we needed to change our classes from one modality to another, we could do so.
Yeah, so we meaning myself and Jeanette, you and the staff, have not had the training yet on scheduling in CTC Link, but it's coming up soon. And Jeanette, I see your name. If you know the date, chime in. But oh, there you go. Go ahead, Jeanette.
Yeah, first of all, the next week we're going to start the training on updating the course catalog in the system. Then shortly after that, I think it's like the beginning of September, they'll start entering the classes into the system, into both system, HP and PeopleSoft.
And PeopleSoft
coming up soon.
Yeah, so it's coming up very soon, which is again why thank you, Alyssa, and the other deans brought it up on Wednesdays, motivating me to bring it up with the VPIs and the district team. We go live with CTC Link on February 21st. Right. And so the winter quarter will be the first quarter where we have something in CTC Link. And the lessons learned from previous colleges is to have both the CTC Link PeopleSoft system and the legacy system, the HP, with the winter quarter schedule. But Trish, your point is well taken. And again, why we're pushing on decisions sooner rather than later, because it's bad enough this adapting to remote. It makes it even harder if we are having to turn on a dime like we have in the past. So I'll reveal my cards that I'm pushing for not only decisions sooner rather than later, but continuing to push that we be conservative in our thinking approaching the winter quarter. But again, those conversations have to play out. And I would also say, Tracy's point earlier, if you have thoughts or opinions on the winter quarter, please let the AFT leadership know, because they also have seats at the table when we're talking about this, and the faculty voice is a strong one in this conversation. One last chance, other questions, whether they've come up in chat, if somebody could let me know, or if anybody has one they'd like to voice. Okay,